Climbing? Really? What is there to talk about? This is what you might think, but even though GURPS climbing rules might seem short and simple, there is enough extra material and special cases that might require explanation. Also, climbing is a very useful skill that most adventurers should have, as the default penalty is very harsh. So put at least a point into it, because even Captain Kirk sometimes has to climb a mountain for whatever reason. Climbing is an average difficulty skill that is based on dexterity. It is penalized for encumbrance. It also gets bonuses from equipment and certain advantages. +2 from brachiator, +3 from flexibility, +5 for double jointed, +1 for perfect balance. The cheaper excellent balance advantage from Pyramid 321 also provides a +1 bonus to climbing. And each level of good grip from GURPS Template Toolkit 2 races gives a +2 bonus. The bad grip disadvantage gives -2 per level to climbing, but the skill description doesn't mention that for some reason. You can also get a bonus to climbing from the esoteric Lizard Climb skill from GURPS Martial Arts, but I'll talk about that later. You also take penalties that depend on what you climb. There is a nice table on page 349 of the GURPS basic set. GURPS Underground Adventures expands it with chimneying. Gravity does not seem to affect climbing rolls aside from possibly increasing or decreasing the encumbrance penalties and providing usual dexterity penalties. So you're a tough young guy with a sinewy body, ready to challenge the rock. But there are some other questions. How often do you have to roll and how fast do you climb? You roll when you start the climb and make another roll every 5 minutes, and if you fail, you fall. As for climbing speed, you have to consult the same table, but there are 2 columns, regular and combat. Regular means slow climbing when there is no threat, and combat means that you're climbing in combat time or in other stressful situations. Combat climbing requires a move maneuver and costs 1 FP. However, some things are not very clear. Do you spend 1 FP per move maneuver or per 5 minutes? Do you still roll every 5 minutes or every second? Unfortunately, I have found no answer to that. There is another odd thing – ladders. The speed is given in rungs, but there is no indication of how far apart the rungs are. I looked up some ladder rung spacing standards and found that usually the rungs are from 250 to 300 mm apart. I think it's safe to round it up to mean that one rung equals 1 foot. Otherwise, by using rules as written, you could make a ladder that has 2 rungs a mile apart. In that case, the climb goes where no man has gone before. Also, many games feature races of different sizes, so a human climbing a ladder made by halflings and 4 halflings would climb slower, because the rungs are closer to one another, and the other way around. You could probably work out some quotient based on the size modifier of the climber and the intended size modifier for a climber for a given ladder, but I think it's easier to simply equate rungs to feet in this case. Also, I have to mention that Pyramid 377 has rules for climbing on top of giant monsters on page 10. That's very neat. Before I go any further, I would like to answer another question. Why doesn't climbing use strength instead of dexterity? The answer is that it can use strength in many cases. Chrome says on the forums that he uses strength-based climbing all the time for near vertical climbs and pull-ups, and GURPS Action 2 and Dungeon Fantasy 2 have rules for pull-ups that use strength-based climbing. Now I have to talk about some advantages. The first one is clinging. It allows you to climb without any climbing rolls, and your climbing move will be equal to half your basic move. This also includes crawling on ceilings. If you fall, then you can try to cling to an adjacent wall with a dexterity roll and a subsequent strength roll that takes -1 per 5 yards already fallen, adjusted for the local gravity. Sounds simple, right? But there are some questions that might arise. First, do you need to touch the surface with your bare skin? For example, a gecko would have the clinging advantage, but what if you put gloves and boots on a gecko? I have not found an answer to this question, but I assume that skin contact is required. Second, what kind of posture do you have to assume while climbing with this advantage? The basic set does not answer that, but GURPS Powers introduces the attraction enhancement that says that you do not need to assume a crawling posture and become able to walk upright. This seems to imply that without this enhancement, you have to assume a crawling posture. However, this attraction enhancement does not say anything about increasing the movement speed, and it seems that even if you stand upright on a wall or a ceiling, you still move only at half your basic move, which seems off. Do you have to buy up your climbing move or do you move at your full move? I assume the latter. It makes more sense to me. Speaking of buying up your climbing move, how do you do it? GURPS Basic Set has a super climbing advantage that gives you +1 to move per level when climbing or using the clinging advantage. Keep in mind that this does not increase your move when using the brachiator advantage. That one is treated as air movement instead, even though it gives a bonus to climbing. But wait a second. +1 to move when climbing? It makes sense with the clinging advantage, but let's check the climbing speed table again. Does it add to both combat and regular speeds? How does it interact with rungs? Why is it +1 to move, which is a huge increase compared to normal climbing speeds? Fortunately, GURPS Powers explains this interaction. For the purpose of normal climbing, each level of super climbing raises climbing speed by the base value on the table. Thus, super climbing 3 gives +9 rungs per second when climbing up a ladder in combat. Also, it says that super climbing does not affect rope down speed with equipment, as it is limited by gravity. That's all for advantages, but there is another skill that I mentioned before, Lizard Climb. It was introduced on page 61 of GURPS Martial Arts, as a cinematic skill for such characters as ninjas and monks. If you read the entire description, you will see that it's more or less a way to gain the clinging advantage with a skill roll, but there are some differences. For example, unlike when using clinging, Lizard Climb does not allow you to climb on ceilings, only on vertical or near vertical surfaces. You have to face the surface and use empty hands and feet, or you can use Lizard Climb with your back to the surface using elbows and heels, so you do not have to hug or envelop the mountain like Captain Kirk. You roll against Lizard Climb once per second, and the roll is penalized for encumbrance, the surface type and inclination, and the number of limbs that you free up. Claws, nature or artificial, give a bonus, but obviously only if you are facing the surface. Your Lizard Climb move is equal to half your basic move, just like when using clinging. The mechanics for catching yourself when you fall are almost identical to those of clinging. You can also use Lizard Climb to give yourself a bonus to a normal climbing roll. GURPS Martial Arts also provides some extra uses for this skill in the chamber fighting section on pages 129 and 130. You can use Lizard Climb to run along a wall, like in Prince of Persia. You can also jump on a wall and stick to it using this skill. Finally, you can retreat up a wall for an extra bonus. Personally, I have never seen Lizard Climb being used yet, but it's one of my favorite skills. Can you imagine a ninja without it? I would love to play around with this skill. As you can see, the rules for climbing aren't actually that simple, and some questions have no answers, so you might want to consult your GM. There are alternative rule sets that you can find on the internet, such as the Alternative Climbing Rules by Christopher R. Rice that I will link in the description. I remember seeing another rule set, but I could not find it. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.